Hello, In Plain English podcast listeners. This is Jamie coming in before the official podcast to record a little bit of an introduction, since so many things have happened since we initially recorded this podcast in December of 2024. Since then, Donald Trump has taken office for his second term and immediately began attacks on federal funding for science. Briefly, he attempted to block all federal funding for science, which luckily has been temporarily reversed by a court and is now pending legal battles. He also is attempting to slash funding for institutions to maintain their research operations and is attacking the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation directly, slashing their budgets and forcing layoffs and turmoil in our nation's premier research institutions. Functionally, what this means is that the institutions and the researchers that do research for cancer, that research neurological diseases, that research infectious diseases, that put out information to protect the public and inform us about upcoming diseases like bird flu, are severely under threat. And as a listener of this podcast, I assume that you care a lot about science being able to be funded and supported and thrive under any presidential administration. So a few things that you can do right now to support science in the United States. First, if you are an academic worker and you have a union, go talk to your union representative, talk to other members of your union, see what you are doing to pressure your university to speak out publicly about the attack on science in the United States, and make sure that you're also protecting vulnerable workers in your institutions, such as international workers who might be harmed by Trump's immigration policies. If you are an academic worker but you don't have a union, you can reach out to me. You can send an email to this show at inplainenglishpod@gmail.com, and I can help you with the process of starting to form a union at your workplace or put you in contact with someone who can. If you are not an academic worker, there are also a few things that you can do to show your representatives and your community that you care about science. First, you can go to 5calls.org, and I'll put the link in the description, to call your representatives at the state and federal level and let them know that you want science to be funded and that you are not okay with the threats to science that have come quickly under this administration. You can also get yourself informed. This is for everyone. There is a Zoom meeting coming up this Thursday, February 13th, that has more information about the cuts to science and what people at different institutions are doing about it. I will put the link to that in the description as well. And finally, just talk to your family, your friends, your coworkers about the effects that this administration is already having on our ability to fund this very important research. It doesn't matter what political party your family or friends support. They should all be very concerned about the attacks on science that have come so quickly into this presidential administration. So with all of that, let's get to the episode, and remember that organizing and working together is our best tool to combat this and all of the other attacks on immigrants and marginalized people and LGBTQ people that are coming with this administration. Stay strong. Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Plain English, a podcast that is all about making science approachable, open source, and jargon-free. My name is Jamie Moffa, and I am your host. And today we're going to be actually talking about union organizing in academia, a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And for this episode, we have three wonderful guests: Jacob Walker, Carla Villanueva, and Eileen Schaub. Everyone, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And can you each give us a brief introduction? Let's start with Jacob.
My name is Jacob Walker. I was first an external organizer with SEIU in the higher ed campaign, organizing adjunct professors. Then I transitioned to internal organizing and contract organizing all over the course of about 5 years. Most of my work was done in St. Louis, Missouri, in both public and private institutions. When it was all said and done, we succeeded in forming 4 new adjunct professor unions and getting contracts that represented significant gains in terms of working conditions, pay, and job security. And now I'm a real estate agent.
Cool. How about you, Carla?
Carla Villanueva, she, her pronouns. Thanks for having me. I'm what we call an AA in UAW's organizing department, which is essentially like a campaign coordinator. And I've been here for almost 5 years, going on 5 years in UAW. But I have over 5 years, over 10 years of union organizing experience in other unions, including SEIU and UHW, Teamsters. And here at UAW, I've been really lucky to work on amazing campaigns, both in higher ed and in manufacturing across the country.
And finally, Eileen.
I'm Eileen, and I am a PhD biology student at St. Louis University, and I am one of the union organizers for the Graduate Workers Union with UAW.
Great. And yeah, I'm super excited to chat today. And first, I wanted to give a super quick background about catching everybody up in the audience on what a union is, who counts as an academic worker, and basically to hammer home that actually academic union organizing has been on the rise lately. And I actually found a statistic right before this that since 2012, the number of unionized graduate workers has increased by 133%, which is really awesome. It's been really great to see that increase in graduate worker organizing, specifically since I'm also a grad worker. But basically, a union is where you and your coworkers get together to collectively organize and bargain for better pay, better benefits, all that kind of good stuff. It's in the U.S., it's a legal framework that actually lets you meet your boss at the bargaining table and win those demands as sort of a collective of workers. And academic workers is actually a really broad umbrella that includes graduate workers like we've been talking about, adjunct professors, which I'm sure Jake and Carla will both talk a little bit more about later, and also full professors, although I think unions among full professors are much less common currently. Is there anything anyone wanted to add to that quick background before we get started?
And postdocs and lab assistants and other cool folks and under the academic world.
I'd also say that of the 4 unions that we formed, 2 of them we worked with the unionized full-time professors also in the community colleges. So in the public sector and community colleges, it's actually pretty common for full professors to be organized.
Oh, cool. I actually didn't know that. So yeah, I kind of wanted to jump into the questions. So I kind of first wanted to ask Eileen, since you're also a graduate worker and you've been organizing at your own institution, and you all just won your union election by a pretty wide margin. It was 352 to 39, I believe, which is fantastic. So I wanted to ask you just high level takeaways, or like, what are your big takeaways from organizing as a graduate student?
So one thing that really struck me through the 1.5 to 2 years since we started organizing is I have a couple of parts. One is just how much of the union work is really just one by one, like just talking to a person. Maybe they know a person, they bring a friend to the union meeting next time, and how many different kinds of people there are at your university that you wouldn't have met if it wasn't for them being a terrible employer who forced you to unionize, because every one of us brought something different. So like I had previous experience in a union. One of us, they knew like a lot about labor history, and were connected in the community, like the St. Louis local community. Another one of us has a passion for spreadsheets, which was a huge help. And then the other thing that really I have been thinking about is just how important it has been to like seek out and become part of like community support and solidarity. we had a lot of help from local labor organizations. So Lou, one of our early union organizers, in fact, the person who kind of got the ball rolling, they met somebody from the Democratic Socialists of America. That person put us in touch with a progressive church that gave us free meeting space while we were still kind of organizing on the QT. Through them, we met the Faith Labor Alliance in St. Louis, which is made up of like local ministers and such who really focus on the, justice and, equality parts of whatever faith they are part of. And through them, we met other local, union members and leaders like the Starbucks organizers and other UAW members. There were a pair of artists who helped us screen print signs for rallies. We had other local unions at our May Day rally standing there with us in solidarity. And we would not have made it as far as we had, so fast as we have, without that kind of that support and interconnection with the other like labor justice organizations, whether they're other unions or just people who believe in helping workers.
Yeah, that's really awesome to hear. It sounds like it really was a whole community effort, which is like really fantastic. Yeah, and I wanted to ask Carla, since you have organized, you said both within academia and in manufacturing, what are kind of the differences that you've seen between academic organizing and organizing in other sectors? Or maybe what are the similarities?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's a question that a lot of people have. I think in my experience, there's a lot more similarities than differences. When folks who are not in academia ask about worker issues, for example, and you start to give examples of what type of the reasons that workers in academia form their unions, it starts to sound very similar to folks in other places. So protections from sexual harassment and discrimination, right? Safety concerns, maybe chemicals in labs is the same issue with chemicals in manufacturing. Access to the right PPE, access to job security, which might look different for a teaching assistant than somebody in a plant. But at the end of the day, it's job security, right? Which motivates you. And money obviously is always an issue, but often not the motivating factor. And in my experience, the similarities are much broader and deeper than the differences. There are some real differences, which is maybe how the workplace interacts with each other. So example, like with postdocs, sometimes there isn't such a close, big community across the university than maybe in a plant where you're working on a line with somebody. But at the end of the day, because the issues are so similar and what motivates people are so similar, the tactics to form a strong union end up being extremely similar also.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to jump back to Eileen. Were those issues that Carla mentioned, or is that sort of like what was motivating this union? Did you see any like additional issues that were really motivating like your union specifically?
Yeah, so I would say like one of the main things that motivated us was money, because from around 2010 to 2023, SLU did not increase the graduate student stipend.
Damn.
Wow.
Whenever you say that out loud, it was 12 years between stipend increases, that kind of has a tendency to instantly, like very quickly bring people like over to your side of like being, especially like, because I found that out after I joined SLU, and I was like, okay, cool. So when do we start the union? So that doesn't happen again. So as Carl mentioned, like, when people are working in like manufacturing and in like, say, a lab in a academic science department, work hours are a big thing. It's very easy to get overworked. It's very easy, especially to feel as though you have no other option but to do what your supervisor tells you to do, even if it's like something you can't do because there aren't enough hours in the day, because that is your living. And it's so hard it's not really a transferable job, right? You can't just go and get, you can't just become a grad student at another university because the relationship is so, depending on what kind of department you're in, like, I'm kind of an old fashioned master and apprentice type thing almost. So yeah, like working conditions and making sure that there's like proper like a way to have like a third party to talk to has also been really important. Like in case, there's a breakdown in communications with you and your supervisor. Yeah. And like one of the things that has, like in our graduate student handbook that SLU has, is that if your PI wants to fire you at the end of the semester, there's not really a set procedure in place at the university level to say like, okay, well, what steps do they have to take to let you know that they're not happy with your performance? So theoretically, yeah, they could just be like, okay, well, it's, the middle of May now, and I haven't been satisfied with the work that this semester, so bye. And you hope, most professors would not do that, but some would.
Grad student employment is very precarious. And I also wanted to ask Jake, because you primarily organized adjuncts and professors. Does a lot of this sort of resonate with what you saw with that population of workers?
I think that when Eileen's talking about people not being able to move and change where they work, like that kind of seemed like a dream to me, organizing adjuncts, because every semester, it was like, I've described it as like running on a treadmill, and it's getting faster as the semester goes on. And you're with organizing, for the audience, kind of the base level of organizing, at least how we do it with adjuncts, which I know is different for other job classifications. We would slowly, quietly collect cards. We would not do a card drop. And the authorization cards are what gets us an election, which is what gets people a union. So we would kind of slowly, quietly collect cards, hoping administration didn't notice until we had the support that we needed. Then we would go public by actually filing for our election. We would not do a public card drop, but we had to do it within a certain semester, or else you have a third of the people move on, your percentages go down, it totally reshuffles the deck. So you might be okay. And if it's a good institution where people actually want to stay and continue to work, but a lot of the time it was just a lot harder. And then, yeah, the different, especially if you were going into summer, it was terrible. Going to people's houses instead of hanging out outside of their classes.
Yeah, I thought turnover among grad students was bad. That sounds rough.
You just had to move quickly. That was the key, is like moving quickly and assessing as many people as you could, and so it was a compressed campaign of maybe 2 semesters is what we would try to do.
Yeah. So I guess this is a really good pivot to opening up to the floor to everyone and asking, what kinds of tactics did you use, and which tactics did you find most effective at organizing in academia?
Happy to get us started with that. I think as both Eileen and Jamie, in UAW, we have I would call it somewhat of a model that's been created over the past few years, definitely before my time. And so I take no credit for it, but I've seen it work very well, which is a very heavily leadership-based model that depends on very little staff. And what we do is we focus on finding leaders who are willing to be public and engage with their coworkers. And we found that makes the card process much faster. And, there's a lot more details that go into that. We could talk about that for hours, but I would say in terms of strategy, it's heavily and deeply focused on developing leaders to lead their union, answer questions for their coworkers, and essentially be the face of the union in all ways, shapes, and form.
That's really interesting, Carla, because I think that's like something that we have a lot of people who had organized other units coming in to higher ed, especially to the adjuncts, through SEIU structures. And if you've worked there, SEIU is a different place. Everyone had these instincts about leadership, but the problem was none of the workers knew each other. So we ended up actually planning a lot of parties, and part of it was trying to make the parties as fun as we could, to try to get people to actually come out and like meet each other. And so we had to like form that on the go, which like I've never got to work in like an organizing campaign that was like a factory or a nursing home or places where people had existing social connections that you could then be aware of when you're organizing. Like it was just everyone kind of started at zero. So it's interesting to hear that works. And I'm sure it was a switch going from like a low staff or a high staff model like SEIU going to UAW as well.
Yeah, SEIU definitely has a higher staff model. I'll just push back a little bit that I feel in a plant, sometimes these plants are like 2 miles long. They might know some of the folks in their department,
right
but
next to
some
them.
Dynamics, you go to an OC meeting and you don't know 3/4 of the folks until you've come together in that space.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
It depends, some departments you enter through a different building or a different side, or you have to have a different type of PPE to go in, which means that you don't, it's like, it's again going back to the idea that there's a lot of similarity, I think.
And that was, in some case an obstacle for us because certain buildings, like you can't get in unless you have card access, or there's a security desk and you have to explain to the person sitting behind it, why you're there and who you're there to talk to. And what we did a lot of at SLU was just like walking from office to office, asking people, hey, have you heard that we're working on a union? We would kind of lead with one, did you know that grad students could unionize? A lot of people didn't know that. And so they would ask, oh, well, what does that mean? It's like we can, my response is usually it means we could negotiate with the university with a legal backing framework so we could get more money and better healthcare, which is generally very appealing to overworked and underpaid grad students. We tried to get as many people from as many different departments as we could, making sure we had once we found out roughly how many people were working in each department, being all right, well, we only need one person from English because they're a small department, but we need 2 or 3 people from bio. We need 4 people. We want to have 4 people from chemistry, and trying to hit those goals of making sure we had enough people to talk to their colleagues. And when things like before the semester last year and this year, we had the new graduate worker orientations, we went there and we handed out flyers, inviting people to a social so we could talk to them more about that. Funnily enough, because a lot of us, are experienced grad students and we're already kind of doing some leadership stuff within our departments, whatever internal department committees for grad student, socializing and stuff. Sometimes one of us would be a speaker on a panel. And so we would be able to kind of slip that in and be so this fall, or this August rather, I was on this thing called the Graduate Assistant Committee at SLU, which was a thing that they started after they got an open letter from a bunch of grad students saying the stipend situation is absolutely untenable. We need to fix this. And they're all right, well, we'll get a bunch of grad students. We'll appoint some of you to consult with us and give us advice, which they are free to take or not take. But as a member of this GAC, I spoke at orientation. There are another couple of grad students in the union who are also on the GAC because, whatever works. And so because outside there are a bunch of union organizers handing out flyers, and inside there's a bunch of experienced grad students talking to, the incoming cohorts, we got questions about hey, what's this union thing going on? And we were able to answer, at a SLU event with a SLU microphone, oh yeah, you should definitely come to our union social. This is what we're trying to achieve with the union. And basically use their resources to talk up the SLUnion, which I won't deny felt really great.
That's really awesome to just be hi, you invited us to speak at this event, so we're going to say whatever we want to say about the union. Yeah, that's really cool. And also kind of brings me to my next question, which is about university anti-union tactics. What kinds of fun yay, anti-union tactics, our favorite conversation. But yeah, what kinds of tactics do universities use to try to combat unions at sort of every stage of the process?
We saw a lot of variety in terms of stalling. We, for the public colleges, we had to get a board vote through the community colleges. So you have to study and learn who these community college board members are, who range from like grandmas that just wanted to get elected to something because they care about their community, or people with actual like political ambition, which is crazy to me. Um, so you had like this large gamut. So then you're in a lobbying situation. And so a lot of our time was spent like getting people to go to these board meetings and pressure them. And then they could just delay or act like they didn't hear us for so long. And then WashU, the community colleges weren't too bad. They were so disorganized, but WashU, oh my gosh, like they had some really sophisticated tactics, way more so. Like SLU at some point kind of realized that the writing was on the wall. They were going to lose the election. They just decided not to fight and to be the good guy. WashU never decided to be the good guy. They never decided to like, one of the things that sticks out to me, is since we have closed shop in the WashU contract with the adjuncts, technically you could not have a job there unless you were a member of the union. And that's technically correct, but it usually isn't a big deal if you give people the union membership card with the new hire paperwork and let them know that this is a requirement. Well, they refused to do that. They said it was our job to get people to sign the union card membership. So then we had about 3/4 of people that were signed up, or 2/3. Then WashU went public with a campaign saying that the union was trying to get you fired.
Oh my God.
Was the craziest thing.
Because this is like you already have the union and the contract, and they're they're still
and it's like not the branding you want for your adjunct union either, like especially being brand new on campus. So then that gets into kind of a thing of like where the campaign and the messaging meets like the legal strategy, because we ended up suing them. It went to arbitration. It was this whole thing, which was a new experience for me. But yeah, that was probably the craziest and most effective tactic I saw. And it was well after, like, we had the contract, we had won the election, we had done all of that, and they were still fighting. And I don't know if they've changed course.
Some of the other tactics we've seen for graduate workers and postdocs, universities seem to focus heavily on international workers. There's often messaging that vaguely insinuate something about a visa, and even though they don't directly say this is going to impact your visa, they insinuate it enough to scare people. And so there has to be a lot of, education around that. Universities also hire anti-union lawyers, just like other industries. So hiring lawyers that make thousands, if not millions of dollars, teaching deans and PIs how to talk negatively about the union. Vanderbilt right now is having a pretty aggressive anti-union campaign with captive audience meetings. They hired Littler, which is one of the most famous anti-union legal strategists in the country. There's a lot of sometimes less structured and more just ideological PIs bringing together their labs to talk about why it's bad, which for those that don't know, but probably if you listen to this podcast, you know that, in academia, PI holds a lot of power over your future career, which can be extremely scary. And then, those are the sticks, but there's also carrots, which is giving everyone raises, which is good. Give raises. That's a win for us, but put it in a contract so we can know what the future looks like also. Right. So I think universities use both carrots and sticks to try to break their unions.
Yeah, for sure.
So at SLU, we haven't had so much overt anti-union. We haven't had like the captive audience meetings. The university has ensued. I honestly, because the university president is retiring next year, I think he, especially with the PR hit that a lot of universities around the country and also WashU in St. Louis took last year for the ceasefire, like pro-ceasefire protests. I think this is an easy way for him to go out on like a good note, look good, and we're not his problem. As Carla just mentioned, like they did give us a bit of a stipend increase. They did start this graduate assistant committee where they would pick like students, submitted their CVs. And so like each school within the university has like a representative, and once a month we talk to the associate dean. But again, like this is an advisory committee. They are free to not take our advice. And in fact, the GAC did really have to push back hard on their initial quote unquote solution for the stipend problem, because it really wasn't much of a solution at all. We said we need a living wage. They were like, okay, well, over a few years, you can get up to 30K.
That's not going to help you buy groceries right now.
Right. Yeah, I went to the grocery store today. It's like, oh, milk went up again. At the time, it was like kind of concerned that, the GAC would like maybe kill our union momentum, but their actual use of the GAC was not as good as it could have been, because it didn't do anything. The concessions they gave us were not good enough to stop our unionizing, to make us think, okay, we don't need a union.
Jamie, didn't you all get better healthcare, or did I imagine that?
WashU's healthcare situation is very complicated. The short of it is that students on the medical campus have different healthcare than students on the Danforth campus. So that's broadly like medical campus is life sciences and Danforth campus is sort of physical sciences and also all of the humanities and social sciences. So formerly, the medical campus students had student health only, which is kind of a double-edged sword, because as long as you're within the WashU network, it's actually really good and has very low copays and everything else, because you're sort of like all within like this WashU bubble. But heaven forbid you need a service that you can't get through WashU, or you're traveling, or, some PhDs require you to travel for large portions of the year and you need healthcare elsewhere. Now you're uninsured, basically. So they did change that, and now we're on Anthem. That was a change, and I think that that's part of the sort of carrot model that Carla was talking about, because WashU is also where we have our own unionization campaign going on, and the administration is definitely trying to provide mostly carrots at this point. And they tend to be, something I wanted to bring up was that they tend to be stratified, and they tend to try to like pit segments of grad workers against one another. So a typical thing that I've heard at other campuses, and that also definitely happens at WashU, is that they try to, the grad students they're already treating well, they try to treat very well, right? Like life sciences and engineering and business, like, in the life sciences sort of department on the med campus, we get a stipend increase year over year. It's not very much. It doesn't keep up with inflation, but it does make you feel, like you're sort of getting something out of the exchange. Whereas that's not the case for a lot of social sciences and humanities PhDs. And so they try to sort of create this division, which I think actually our union organizing team has been pretty good at overcoming. And I think there's a lot of solidarity between the like sciences and humanities here. But I did want to add that that's another thing that they do.
And yeah, like universities do kind of have like this natural, like every workplace, I'm sure has like its own kind of like inbuilt, like ingrained thing that they use as an advantage against to try to hamper unionizing efforts. And in universities, I think, is the fact that just like by the way they're structured, they're very siloed. So, for instance, the history department, like the American Studies department, is like half a mile away from where I work on campus. So it's a long walk for me to, go over there and talk to history folks. You have lab offices, which are, for security reasons, like they're generally all locked. You need card access to get in. So if you want to talk to people in a lab, you got to knock on that door. There's not a lot of interdepartmental mingling, and they for sure, take advantage of that, just like as a natural roadblock to us, because we have to do twice as much work to overcome that. And they don't have to do anything about the fact that, the engineering department is like over 3 buildings, and they have windowless doors in their offices, for instance. Like, that, I'm sure, was not a decision made specifically to keep grad students from unionizing, but it sure made it harder to find engineers.
There's also, talking about the siloed nature, it's also like the work patterns of the different adjuncts are so different too, or the different departments of like, I've had conversations with somebody that when they were digging up the IKEA in Midtown, I had an appointment with someone, but they had found an underground cache of like cholera corpses.
What?
And this particular professor was like the main anthropologist in St. Louis and also one of our leaders. So like as the bones were coming in, I was like talking to her and talking about the union. And I just
Oh my
remember being like,
God.
yeah, I was just in an art studio like an hour ago talking to someone that was like painting, and they were both hard to find because they were in and out of their classrooms. They were. So then if you have like, I remember like especially at WashU, like Sam Fox, that was like always such a wildly different schedule. And what it said when the professors would be there always wasn't the case, versus like English, where like that was a very like 9 to 5, like you found them in their office. They actually congregated in their office. Like some departments never use their office. Like there's space, but they're never there. So like that's really hard too, because we would get like other adjuncts to go talk to the rest of the adjuncts that need to be talked to, get on their schedule and all of that. And a lot of times we'd walk around and just not be able to find anybody, which was just the nature of that kind of organizing sometimes. Like some of the departments, they just don't have to come in, it's just, especially with adjuncts.
Yeah. And especially like with the post-pandemic, like for instance, like there are some departments in SLU that just like they went online during the pandemic, and just because like they're doing clinical work or whatever as part of their academic work, they just kind of stayed online. And so like their classes are all over Zoom. So, wherever they're attending their classes from, it's not somewhere we know where it is. So like their offices are pretty much empty.
I will say that some of the stuff that you just said, Jacob, reminded me that I feel like I've met some fascinating people with their research that has just been such a highlight of organizing in higher ed, is the different research and the things you get to talk to people about. It's so
Brilliant people.
expansive.
Yeah.
It's brilliant. I mean, I think there's brilliant people everywhere. It's so fun, and you hear people's lives of what led them there. And, I've met people who, make alcohol and brew stuff as part of their science, people who are working on like COVID research, and people, it's just like this vast world of people's research is definitely like a cool plus of
And the
organizing.
breadth on one university that you can go from, like the diversity of what is actually happening on the campus is fascinating. It's like, I'm really like, I have a lot more respect for like what universities are and what they do now.
All the international workers move their lives to come do research here. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it makes you want to organize it, because I think we all understand that like organizing it is not like going against these universities. It's making them stronger, and it's making them more resilient for the future, like the entire organization. And that's like most of the time what organizing results in, because what is happening on these campuses like WashU and SLU, and I was at UMSL, that was one of our things, like, and UMSL is one where it's like, what a good value for such a good education and brilliant people teaching those students. And like in a public institution, and you really end up wanting to like make these places fair and better for our community if you spend enough time in them, because they do so much good.
I do believe that people form unions to help that place thrive. People have pride in the work they do, whether that's building a car or doing research in a lab. There's a pride to doing good work, and you want the company or the university to thrive and make it more accessible and make it a place where more people can come in. And that's definitely the case in universities. And it's not about fucking over a company, it's about how do we make it thrive? How do we make this a place we can stay? How do we make it sustainable? I do believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, like there is such a difference in how I felt as a grad student at UConn, which unionized a couple years before I got there to do my master's degree, and how I felt like at SLU my first year, because like at UConn, people were happy. Like they were happy. They, were well paid. Like, no, we're not doing this to get rich, but like, they're able to rent like a reasonably nice apartment that, and like if it turned out to not be a great apartment, they could move without it being a huge deal. My department, specifically evolutionary biology and ecology, the university sort of didn't know what we were for, but we still had support through, because we were unionized. And so like the things that they had put in place also as like carrots to like back before I got there, when they kind of still kept those up too, like the annual Thanksgiving dinner. So it's like, okay, well, so there's still nice stuff. There's still a graduate appreciation week. I felt like I was seen and recognized as a person and a researcher. I knew that if the jerk who was in charge of the non-major intro bio class threatened to fire me because I was not a perfect teacher after a 90-minute orientation, that he couldn't actually do it. At SLU, like within the first semester, I realized, oh, all of my new colleagues in the biology department, who are all smart people who I want to get to know better and want to be friends with, they're all really tired and demoralized. And they're giving me advice on like what food banks to go to and the process of selling blood plasma and how much you get for your first appointment versus like your third or fourth. Like, oh, okay. It just seems to be like this thing where universities look right through their grad students unless we force them to acknowledge us.
I think adjuncts had a similar situation, at least at WashU, because and it's crazy too, because WashU is like just located physically within one of the most like old money parts of St. Louis as well, which there is a lot of money here. It's just kind of hidden. I remember having a conversation, like you would have these adjuncts that could be living in their car, often lived with their parents. Like they were making about $21,000 to $25,000 a year on average, just depending on how many classes they got. Like if they had a WashU class, they were actually one of the lucky ones versus the ones that could only pick up stuff at the community colleges. But it was also a network of people who took classes, like the same professors that were at the community colleges were also teaching at WashU, which was crazy with the price difference in tuition and things like that. But it was like WashU having all that like wealth around you of just like, even you walk in the Duck and like we're organizing it everywhere in St. Louis, but you go into WashU's cafeteria, it is a very different experience. And then you talk to these adjuncts and it's just like, yeah, there's all of this like kind of proximity to wealth there, but it actually benefits very few people on the WashU campus. I mean, even the full-time lecturers when I was organizing there were making like just at $40,000 a year to be a professor, to wear professional clothes every day, you know, to do all of that. So it was really eye-opening and kind of a similar thing of like, yeah, there was this network of like how to be poor, because a lot of the people, frankly, that go into grad work or become adjunct professors don't have a background of like being poor. Like they went and they pursued higher education. There's also a lot of shock of like, what do I do now? So there's a lot of education around that of like, actually, yes, a union is for you too. Like a union is here to help you. It's not just something that like manufacturing workers do, or, you know, it's not this like, actually at WashU, there was a lot of pushback in terms of just, for one, SCIU being a union that they knew as a janitor union. And then for two, which was always a fun question to get. And then for two, just kind of like people who had been the kids of, you know, middle managers or lawyers or whoever, these like professionals who hadn't really encountered a union and didn't really know like, oh, this is something for me now. Like there was a little bit of acceptance that had to happen before they started supporting of like, this is my life now.
And at least like for grad workers who I'm going to generalize as all being roughly my age, you know, we sort of grew up in an era of pretty low union density. Like unions were decimated in the US in the 70s and 80s. I was born in the 90s. So like my parents weren't in unions. I can't think of anyone in my family, like my immediate family, who was in a union. So it's actually pretty incredible that academic unions have seen such a boom. It seems like over the last like 5 to 10 years. And I don't know if any of you have like any insider thoughts as to what might be driving that trend or why that is, because now it seems like, you know, every university is unionizing.
Well, I think workers have created a movement, you know, and it snowballs a little bit, you know, and I think that the universities used to be really good at stopping grad workers from forming unions. Obviously, you know, I don't know in the adjunct or professor world, but they used to be really good at it. And then we figured out like a way to win. And we're able to reproduce that in other places. And it's such a worker-led model that it's able to like snowball in a really exciting way across the country. And it's been really awesome to watch.
Also with the decline of manufacturing, like there isn't people don't have that in their face. Other example of other unions, like a lot of places, these more public service type things are the things that are unionized still, like schools and, teachers and things like that. So
you can give unions like all the bad press that you want, and they did. But at the end of the day, like the pressures we're facing, yeah, you can say, oh, well, you're a grad student, you don't need to unionize. We're a university, we're special, blah, blah, blah. Unions are other people. They're coming in to change your workplace. But when you can't support a cat, like that's sort of an immutable fact. Like, I don't have enough money. I am selling blood plasma. They are trying to, for instance, at like UConn, what the impetus of the union is like, they're trying to make everybody use like the undergrad, like the student health center on campus that gives you, aspirin and like Bactine and a bandage for like, and you're, a 30-year-old professional with like a 3-year-old or whatever. So like, that's obviously not going to work. And so like when you're pushed up against like that fact and you're looking for, a release valve, a way to fix it, there's the National Labor Relations Act, we can form a union. A union like factually will just like give us a legal framework to push back against this. The fact is we don't have enough money, and a union was a way, we're having trouble making a living, and that is a solution. And when people start doing that, then they realize like, oh yeah, no, a union is not some weird abstract thing. It's not like, I don't know, a mob boss coming in from wherever. It's me hanging out with my friends. Like, we're complaining about our salary, our stipends being too low, and then being like, well, we can organize a union. There are, unions around here. We can get in touch with one of them and talk to them and form our own union. And then it's like, oh yeah, it's us. It's not somebody outside. When you like are going through the process, like, yeah, no, like UAW didn't come swooping in and being like, oh, well, we noticed you forming a union with our unionizing radar. We got in touch with them. We got in touch with SEIU, with AFT, with Communication Workers of America. And we talked to each of like several different groups. And then we decided it's like, yeah, no, UAW seems like they would have the best tools and the best help for us. And then when you're talking to your colleagues about it, like they're not talking, again, to somebody outside. They're talking to you, the person who works in the lab on the 3rd floor, who's growing plants in the greenhouse or whatever.
It's so refreshing to hear that, like, because when we were having conversations when I started, at least in St. Louis, like St. Louis was maybe the 3rd or 4th city that got targeted with the testing out whether this would work or not. And it had worked on the coast, but St. Louis was kind of the test for the Midwest. And the amount of conversations we had with smart, educated people just explaining what a union was, and then hearing that you guys like went and like interviewed these different unions to figure out what would work best for you, and then reformed even that relationship between the organizer and the workers, which is like what we as organizers always wanted, but it was just a little too early in the process. I think like we were kind of laying the foundation of like, this can work. Look at these raises the adjuncts have gotten from organizing. Like we got 25% raises at SLU, for example, for the adjunct union. That their first contract was pretty good, like pretty solid. It was just all we could do to like teach people and then get them to come out to something. And then there was a lot more hand holding. So for you guys to see, okay, this has worked, but like what's going to work for us and what do we want to do? And we want to really, truly, actually be in the driver's seat is very inspiring to me. I'm very happy, especially at SLU, a place that I annoyed for many, many years to try to get them to do the right thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear how much that's switched, because at WashU, we basically had a very similar experience to what Eileen was describing, where we were like trying to figure out who we wanted to go with. We were having conversations about like the sort of operating ideologies of the different unions and what sort of resources they had on offer. And it was like, it was a very well-researched endeavor, which, you should expect nothing less from a bunch of researchers.
I want to have a caveat for the listeners. The best union to organize with is the one that's talking to you and that's actually going to put resources into organizing your school. That is sometimes a boss fight tactic that's taken, is they say, oh, you don't want this particular union, you want another union. We're not anti-union, we just don't like this particular union. And you can't fall into that trap either. If there's already a campaign happening, go with that campaign. You can figure that out after you do the election, but that is a very common kind of derailing boss fight tactic that lets the universities still look pro-union, especially in more liberal places, like liberal political places. So just be on the lookout for that too. I don't want to give too much of an endorsement of union shopping, but
And that's a good point, Jake. Yeah, just organize the union, and then, like Eileen was saying, the union is you. So like you are not going to, something that like I have to tell people a lot. They're like, oh, what if the contract actually reduces our stipend? I'm like, why would you vote for a contract that reduces your stipend? Like you are in charge here. And if the negotiating team hasn't gotten you at least a little bit of a raise, like why would you vote for that contract? Tell them to go back and fix it.
Yeah, when people ask me like when I tell them what the bargaining process is going to look like, I emphasize that. It's like, yeah, and so we'll have a bargaining committee of like, other grad students, and we sit in a room with like, the administration, we talk. And then if we come out with a contract that you don't like, you can vote it down and send us back into the room to keep talking to them.
And the great thing is there's examples of that happening now with the UAW. Like the UAW has been in this fight with this new leadership and, like sent people back. There's been at the longshoremen, there's been this like these high profile things that illustrate exactly what happens when workers don't like their contract and they keep rejecting it.
It's about power though, right? And I think it's important for folks to understand that the real movement at the table happens because of the power that's built out at the table, outside of the table. And so, yes, we can always vote down contracts. That is definitely a strategy we have available to us. But, we have to continue to organize on the outside in order to move that table on the inside. And there's no way around that. We can vote contracts all day long, but if we're not building power to leverage the employer, it's not going to change anything.
There's no secret negotiating tactic that unlocks Yeah.
So can maybe we talk about like, as you've won your union election, yay, like how do you maintain momentum and maintain that worker power to be able to put pressure, and like what are tactics that you use at that stage?
The contract negotiation stage?
For both the first contract, and then also I had a listener ask about subsequent contracts and how you maintain sort of worker power over the long term.
I think for academic workers, or I guess I'll say grad workers and postdocs with the high turnover, it's easy to think of that as a negative or a roadblock. You can also think about it as something really positive, that you ingrain it in the academic locals. And I've seen it happen. I've worked less on the East Coast, but I've definitely seen it on the West Coast, where in the local, so once you form your union, and you negotiate a contract, you get your own local, which is essentially a local-based group of elected leaders that help you implement your contract and help you, build a strong union. And a constant, like in orientations, I think, Eileen, you were talking about this, there's a way that every time there's a new cohort to find new leaders, find new energy, find new blood, train people, and make that into the cycle of your union, just the cycle of the academic world. And I think that negotiating a strong contract is very similar to winning an NLRB election. It's a little different. It's not an election, but in terms of building that power, there's so much similarities. It's having that leadership coverage, it's doing actions on the boss. It's showing that we're united outside, and maybe even a strike or two in there, some withholding of labor.
Let's talk about academic union strikes. What do strikes look like in academia? And when do academic unions go on strike?
At least for us, we never had an academic union strike, but it was really fun to talk about. Who gets into working for a union and doesn't think strikes are cool? So
strike.
Have something. It is a little bit of a double-edged sword because not everyone wants to go on strike. So you have to be careful in the way that you talk about it, because first, I think strikes are really cool. Like, I'm also one of the 0.001% of people that thought working for a union would be really cool. So you have to realize how kind of weird you are in that aspect, that like other people could be not as jazzed about that and been, there, at least with the adjuncts, we had a lot of people of like, yeah, this makes logical sense, but like this job is 1/3 of my pay. So we had to kind of that seems all consuming. So that seems really scary. So we just had to be careful with it is a powerful weapon, but it's also only as powerful as the the strategy that you employ around it. And threatening a strike and then actually not having the oomph to pull it off in your back pocket power wise is never, ever good. I think we would always threaten it. We were lucky that we always got things settled in an action beforehand. We always figured out a way to apply pressure because we didn't want it. Strikes are disruptive. And we didn't want to capriciously employ our biggest tactic and then have nothing else to escalate to either. So we were always able to do it, but it is the most powerful tool that workers have. Maybe not the most powerful, but it's one of the most powerful tools workers have in their arsenal.
It's definitely the most powerful, I'd say. I think no one really wants to strike. It's very difficult and can be painful, and you have to make hard decisions, whether it's not teaching a class or not doing research in a lab. For those, who've never seen a strike or don't know how it's decided, it's a very democratic process. It's something that the workers decide once they're ready and they have to vote for it. It's not something that's decided externally by somebody else. And it's usually not taken lightly. I was part of the 2022 strike in the UC system across, people are going to hate me for this. Is it 11 UCs, 13 UCs? Sorry, guys, I can't remember. It was one of the most powerful things I've seen. It's extremely difficult because everyone's jobs look different and the labor that they're withholding is different. It was exciting to see. It was the first postdoc strike in the academic setting ever to be had before. People not doing research in their lab and also not grading and teaching. That impacts the university differently. And it's extremely powerful to be able to impact the university in both the research and the teaching. And I think there's some people out there who believe that researchers can't strike, that it's only people who offer teaching services because people's research is connected to their own personal academic career, which I just don't think is true. And we saw that happen in the UC in 2022.
Yeah, that strike was really impressive. I actually was in the area for a conference towards the beginning of the UC strike. And so actually there was, a group of us that organized a walkout from the conference to go join.
UC San Diego.
Yeah.
Neuroscience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had strong leaders from UC Davis there. It was great.
Yeah, it was really awesome. It was very sort of inspiring. Me and another organizer from WashU went, and we were like, hell yeah, this is like really awesome. This is, the kind of power that we want to build at WashU. So even just like sort of seeing labor actions like strikes at other universities is, I think, very powerful for motivating and getting the conversation started. Like, I think a lot of people after the UC strike at WashU were talking about the strike. And so they were talking about unions. So that was a really great sort of piggybacking off of that to talk about like, we could also have a union.
It was thousands of conversations across the UC with people explaining how contract negotiations work, where power comes from. How can we get more at the table? It's just like there's no way around those individual, conversations with thousands and thousands of people.
Well, it's also nice to see that so many people went on strike and they are better off now. I mean, anytime you have that example, it was just, I remember we would go around with Tufts University contract. That was one of the best adjunct contracts that we had that we could look at. And I remember we had this one that we had kept making a copy of the copy until someone was finally like, were there people on this at some point? Because now it's just like an abstract art with words because we had used that so much. But anytime you do the first thing and like, especially large scale, because you think about all the things people are going to say of like, well, that might work at the small liberal arts college, but like this is WashU or this is the UC system or whatever. You have a huge system like that doing it, and public, like public is very difficult, at least in the Midwest. I worked on University of Minnesota and UMSL, and both got bogged down in like the public process, which is why those have not unionized yet. But maybe Carla will jump in and finish what we started.
Like on the topic of like new contract negotiations, like, you already have the first contract and now it's like 2 years are up. I was in UConn when that happened for our union, because UConn is a public university and like, Connecticut state law, we weren't allowed to actually strike. But we did go on a few marches across campus, walking through campus buildings with signs saying fair contract now. I remember very clearly like walking through like one, kind of student center financial aid building, and up like in the gallery, there was like, a professor going like, yeah, as we marched by. And we had like a sit-in outside the president's office. We just like as many union people as could fit just sat there, being like, this is how many of us there are. We, stop dragging your heels. Give us specifically, they didn't want to give us good sexual harassment protections, which was a wild stance to take in 2018 at the height of Me Too. And they were like, no, actually, we don't think you need. And like there had just been a case with a student who like the union had to advocate for this young woman to be able to change like labs from a professor who was seriously sexually harassing her, to the point where like an outside like labor organization said, yeah, we're going to give the person who was kind of like her advocate, we're going to give that person an award because she did such a good job advocating for the student against the university. And they were like, no, we don't think you should have that great sexual harassment protection. So they're like, all right, well, we are all going to sit down in your office, outside your office, Susan Herbst, and you can come in and explain to us why you don't think that. She didn't show up that day, shockingly.
In the process of contract campaigns, I've been involved in two kind of big, probably four, like kind of contentious contract campaigns. And in my experience, since we never had to strike, there was always like some sort of misstep the university took where they just dug their heels in on a really nonsensical place. And we were able to and this is a credit to like our communications department, ties with local media and stuff within St. Louis, that we were able to just like really start publicizing what the universities were saying at the table. And these universities in St. Louis, they own like vast swaths of the city. They are very, very powerful. So people see them as like these pillars of the community. And so like, I remember SLU was really dug in one time, and we had an action where we had an action that was loud that disrupted like the students coming into the lunchroom, and the university police, and this is right after Ferguson in St. Louis. So this was about 6 months to a year after Ferguson. In SLU's cafeteria, we had student activists causing a scene, protesting about the adjuncts. They arrested the one person of color, and left all of the white students, and took the one person of color to the patrol car. So then within like 20 minutes, all of the Ferguson group chats were lighting up and people were on their way to SLU, and they settled the contract within like 24 hours after that, which was crazy. And the person got out of jail. Thankfully, the union had good, we had a good support system for anyone that was arrested. It was, we had planned for that. And
there's that community support too, that, yeah, the vast activist network of St. Louis was like, no, fuck that. We're going to go show up for this person.
Well, it was just one more thing, and during that time, we had this huge apparatus of like activists that would actually show up and that were used to showing up and being visible. And we knew already what the police would do. They knew, oh, wow, this is just the SLU public safety. We're not afraid of that. We've been getting tear gassed in Ferguson for the past 6 months. Like, this is fine. We'll show up right now. Like, the SLU is easy to get to. It's very accessible. So that was kind of the thing that settled that contract. They did not want to talk about it anymore after that. So you got to be open and flexible in a contract campaign too, to like take advantage when the other side missteps.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to also ask, this is maybe the second to last question, but what is the role, since we've been talking sort of about the broader union movement within academia, what is the role of academic unions within the broader labor movement in the U.S.?
I don't know if there's a specific role, but I think there's a lot of potential and opportunity. Reality is that a lot of folks, I guess, again, I'm thinking about graduate workers, postdocs, they then go into thousands of other industries. Sometimes they stay in academia, sometimes they stay as professors, but they often then go out and do other stuff. And I think it has a lot of potential to grow our labor movement in other industries if thousands of people are going through these unionized education processes, it has the potential to hopefully grow in other industries.
I'll say that I have noticed, like, once you start organizing, like, your workplace and you start getting some momentum, you want to help everybody else organize theirs. So, like, your friend who's not working at a university complains about, their workplace, and you're like, union? You could unionize. I can help you. Let me tell you all about how unionizing works. It's a bug. You catch it. I feel like it's just like increasing like this critical mass. And like, as we've said like a couple of times, like, there was this image of like a union worker being like, a factory worker or like a very specific type of, like manufacturing type job. And it often still is, but like broadening the image of like what a union worker is, I think is like, it creates like maybe like this greater critical mass of like how many workers in the country are unionized, because like it's not just, factory workers with manufacturing declining. It's like, well, then there's fewer union workers because it's getting, has been and is still being shifted overseas. But it's like, oh, it's the teachers at the elementary school. It's, college students go and they're like, oh, my TA in intro bio is wearing a union yes button. What's that about? And so like, they'll see their TAs, marching across campus. You go home like to, your friends and family, you talk about the union, you maybe start changing people's like minds a little bit, because it's easy to say, it's like, oh, I don't know about unions in the abstract, but like when it's your niece or nephew coming home for Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever, it's like, yeah, we're really, getting momentum with our union. It's like, well, I want to be proud of my young relative here. I'm automatically on their side. And so you listen to them talking about why they're unionizing,
You're saying we all need to come out as union supporters. That's what you're saying?
It won't work on every conservative uncle. I know that, but it might help a few.
Yeah, I think that like looking at the role, like everyone back in my grandparents' generation were trying to get manufacturing jobs and those to support their families. And going to high school was the big accomplishment. Going to high school, get a manufacturing job. But they also they understood that they were not going to get anything from just the bosses in those manufacturing plants being nice to them. And I think that like we have to go to school, strive to get a white collar job to support ourselves. Like that's what the American economy is moving towards. So like we have to also not trust our employers that much and like take the issue into our own hands of making our own living and standing up for ourselves in this new economy, like our grandparents did.
Manufacturing is booming again, I think, in the US and the battery EV world, I guess, if I put my auto worker hat on. And it's exciting to see that manufacturing can also be a sustainable career that people will stay at long term and support their families. It's going to be an uphill battle again to make sure manufacturing is that middle class job.
And also my perspective is from St. Louis, which we have the ruins of of manufacturing everywhere. So it's very evident of what's happened here too.
Previous generations, like, yeah, that manufacturing was how you got into the middle class. And then they told like my generation, and like people who graduated high school in the 80s, like, you have to go to college. You have to go to college. That's how you get a good job. And then we went to college and then we got saddled with like tens of thousands of dollars of student debt. And whatever job we had couldn't really touch that.
Yeah, it's pretty radicalizing.
It is. I managed to like kind of radicalize my office mate just by telling her what the university president's salary was, because we were, talking a little bit about the union, and she kind of like came up with like, oh yeah, I'm sure he makes like $400,000 a year or something, and I like just kind of like was automatic like $800K. She said, what? Then I got to this whole conversation. We were trying to figure out what you would even do with $800,000 a year. And now every time I talk to her about the union, she brings that up.
You sometimes never know what it's going to be with people either. And it's like, you can, there's adjuncts that I talked to, I went back and went back and went back, and we just kept having conversations. And then at some point, sometimes it doesn't ever happen and they're just wasting your time and they're never going to support. But then sometimes something clicks and they become this like activist, this radical, and you're like, whoa, cool. Like, let's not go talk to the chair just yet. Let's wait till.
Yeah, the thing that it was for a lot of at least STEM grad students at WashU was one particular instance of sexual assault that was handled incredibly poorly by the lab and the university. And there were people, like a lot of people got interested in the union. There were people like, we should go on strike right now. I'm like, wait, hang on, we can't do that. Really, there's a process, but I love the enthusiasm.
A slightly more humorous version of that, a previous boss I had when I worked at SEIU talked about trying to organize a nursing home, and they were about to pull the plug on the campaign because they just couldn't find any traction. They thought that there was some support, then suddenly there wasn't. And a family of raccoons started living in the smoking shelter toward the end. And that was like the issue that united and motivated everyone to form a union, because these management wasn't like, people wanted to smoke. It was the middle of winter. It was really cold out. I think it was in Montana or something. And so like people were forced to go into the smoking shelter, but like with the raccoons. So
I think we've our funny unionizing story. Do you have a funny unionizing story to share?
Oh, lame. I don't think I do.
Nothing funny has ever happened.
Well, there's one really funny one, but I definitely can't have it in the podcast. So
I guess mine wasn't that funny, but another one was when we were doing a march related to the sexual assault and our campaign to try to win better protections, or at least like make it clear that we need a union to have better protections against sexual assault and harassment. And so we were literally just marching. The WashU has these like indoor link corridors that go between the buildings on the medical campus. We were just marching in there. There was this like WashU security, like he was a wannabe cop who was following us around and saying like, oh, you can't go here. You can't make noise here. There was like a poster session going on. He was like, you've got to be quiet when you're walking through here. And of course we like chant louder. He just keeps getting like redder in the face until we get to the elevators that go up to all of the like WashU Med campus admin. He's like, you can't go up there. And he starts like calling his pretend cop buddies like WashU security on
God,
his
are you gonna call
walkie-talkie. I'm like, what are you gonna do? We're students and we're allowed to go see the like people who are in charge.
I was at St. Louis Community College Wildwood one time, which is like the ends of the earth. It's so far out, especially compared to the other campuses. And this campus resource officer found me organizing people. And there was like fights among the administration and the union about how much access we had, but we just kept going. Mm-hmm. And he came up to me and was like, are you supposed to be here? And I was like, I truly don't know. I'm just here to talk to somebody. I have an appointment with someone. He's like, well, you need to listen to me. And I am a real cop. And he like actually like arrested me and took me to this closet in the basement, like arrested, quote unquote. And like, I think if I just ran away, I could have gotten away very easily. But like, I decided to let the union lawyers handle it. But yeah, it was weird seeing the inside of like the quote unquote jail at St. Louis Community College Wildwood, which was one building. It was not a real campus. It was just like an office building. Was crazy.
All right. Before we wrap up, do any of you have any like social media websites, anything that you would like to plug that you'd like our listeners to go to?
Yeah, I have a Blue Sky account, but I think I mostly just repost plant pictures. So
where can people Eileen, does the Sloonian have a website?
Oh, yes, actually, I will put a link. We do have an Instagram. Officially, it's like the Instagram is GWSLUU_UAW.
Yes, the link will be in the show notes. Please go follow the Sloonian for updates. You can see
lots of pictures of, lots of our voting pictures of like lots of students with their left fist raised with Union Yes stickers on outside of buildings.
Amazing.
My stuff is, you can just search for Jacob Walker on Facebook. I'm Jacob the Walker on Instagram. If you need to sell a house and you want to hear fun union stories, you want former union organizers sell your house, or if you want to hear old war stories while we go around and look at houses, I'm your agent. So let's do it.
Thank you all so much for being on this episode. I have had a fantastic time. I'm so glad that we were able to chat about union organizing.
Thanks for having us, and everyone go out and form a union.
Yes.
Yeah, it was good to meet everyone.
Do it right now.
Yeah, go form a union right now.
Go form a union, that's right.
Yeah, well, we have been talking with Jacob Walker, Carla Villanueva, and Eileen Schaub. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast, either as an expert or a non-expert, you can contact us at inplainenglishpod@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook, and Instagram at Plain English Sci. That's PLAINENGLISHSCI. Our music is by Sam Brunwasser. You can find more of his music at soundcloud.com/visualsnowbeats. The logo is by the wonderful team at Biographics. That's Tanya Lintz, Yolanda Campos, and Jessica Higginbotham. Thanks for listening, and tune in next time for another episode of In Plain English.